manufacturers. Next slide. So I would just like to tell you about some housekeeping rules. Yeah, so the webinar will be recorded. The attendees are in listen mode only. Please submit questions via the question panel and live question and answer at the end of the presentation. Next slide. So I would just like to brief you all about DQS, who we are. We are Germany's first certification body for management system. Next slide. So these are our shareholders. We were established in 1985 as Germany's first company for the certification of quality assurance systems. And these are our shareholders. Next slide. So we have a global network, and we are in about we have 85 offices in 60 countries, and we have about 2,500 auditors and experts, and we have a global presence and local expertise. Next slide. To present ourselves as one DQS across the globe, we have recently rebranded with a redesigned logo. As you can see, the logo was rebranded in 2022. And our new global website is www.dqsglobal.com. Next slide. The industries we serve. So we serve about 25 plus industry verticals, and we also certify 200 plus standards, such as medical, aerospace, automotive, oil and gas, railways, and many others. Next slide. So these are our certifications portfolios, and for now, for medical, we certify ISO 13485, CE marking, and MDSAP. Next. So the speaker is Mr. Michael Bothe. He is the head of notified body active medical devices. I welcome Mr. Michael Bothe.
Yeah, thank you very much, and also good afternoon to the audience. I'm pretty enlightened that we had about 120 people to join. The interest is high, and today is my pleasure to introduce to you to the latest changes in terms of date of application of the MDR. Before we enter into the subject, just a few words about myself, my background. So as you can see, I'm a senior manager meanwhile. So I graduated in telecommunications in 1985, did an executive MBA at Henley Management College in 1997, and my focus is pretty much wide. So I covered various roles in my career, starting predominantly in R&D, of course, but also quality management, regulatory affairs. And I was involved in a couple of industries, consumer electronics, automotive, and medical. So my experience ranges from 35 years in standardization, 24 years in industry work, 15 years at various notified bodies, and meanwhile also 5 years at DQS Med. And my role is head of notified body for active medical devices. My responsibilities span overall responsibility for the conformity assessment procedures. So I'm reporting to our designating authority, and which is always in the background, whatever we do, and authorization of assessors for conducting conformity assessment procedures. So topic today, extension of transition period. And before we start in that, I can tell you that we invested a enormous efforts in making that happen. So one of my colleagues within DQS Med is Dr. Thomas Feldman. He is the chair of the notified body technical group. So that is, of course, the notified bodies all over Europe meet twice a year. So next week, the next meeting is due in Brussels. And this is the plenary session. Formally, about 55 notified bodies have been participating in that as being designated to the medical device directive. So in the meantime, despite of huge efforts to get designation, the number in Europe is diminishing. So we are at this point in time at about 35 who has already received their designation yet. And the operational arm is the technical group, and operational means these are the people in doing the work and directly interacting with the Commission. And since we were pretty early aware that with the pace of conformity assessment procedures under the MDR was lagging behind to a huge extent, we started in collecting data and evidence to, let's say, commission somehow to consider postponement or to extend the transition period. So at the very first stage, that was not really sufficient. So they listened what we said, and we had the impression that before even considering an extension, they tried to work on other subjects. And one of these is, of course, the publication of MDCG papers. One very prominent has been published around September last year. It's MDCG 2022-14, which is a collection of potential activities being conducted or undertaken from a variety of stakeholders. So some of them were directly addressed. For instance, some of you might know that the European Medicine Agency, that's the authority for combination products of medical devices, which of course disposes pharmaceuticals, is extremely lagging behind. So one of the proposals out of this MDCG paper has been, please, European Medicine Agency, intensify your work. And that was addressed to the management. So if you read that MDCG paper, you cannot keep yourself from a bit of a smiling how naive these argumentations were to get people doing their job who didn't do that in the past. Others were pretty much appreciated because they were part of the input we have already provided. For instance, the option in at least partially doing some remote audit activities or hybrid audit activities with some assessor on site and some connected remotely via the internet. That has been well received. Others go into the direction, train the clients. And today is one of these amazing opportunities to train a couple of you, give you better idea and insight into the framework, which has quite recently changed. And honestly, we put a lot of efforts in the last 2 years in offering webinars to a variety of topics, starting from quality management aspects via text file composition, structure, and content, and other stuff to fulfill these requirement of the European Commission that we enable our clients for easy to do and a simple application for a conformity assessment procedure. So that was a little bit of the introduction. So you already heard a couple of things before from a colleague. So let's focus on the new things. The DQS Med was a spin-off of the DQS in 2008, and since then we developed pretty well, not just in terms of customer base, but also in regard of the assessors network we govern, and of course also in terms of acknowledgement of the quality of our services. And honestly, after 2 years of extreme hard work and struggle, we managed as the 16th notified body under MDR to be to MDR, 15% within nearly 3 years, and not much more than a year before the original date of application became valid, or will become valid on May the 26th, 2024. So even with huge efforts in terms of productivity gains, in terms of learning curve for aspects, in terms of having a number of new assessors onboarded to enlarge the assessor base, etc., we came to the conclusion that best case at the original date of application, we might manage to be about 50% of our client base having completed their transition. And honestly, this is not an individual issue for DQS Med. So there were some information collected from the overall situation within Europe. So any of these originally 33 out of 35 responded, and this picture is pretty much the same. Anybody is extremely lagging behind, so that at the very end, the Commission has no other choice in honestly considering an extension of the transition period. Good. So in terms of the topic of today, a brief agenda. So first of all, I give you some information in historical view. So what has been happened since the initial publication of the MDR in 2017, and look back, this is already 6 years ago. And usually transition periods for standards, for instance, are 2 years or even less. Now we are talking after about 6 years for an extension of a transition period. So that never happened before. Second topic is we will go into detail on the regulation covering the extension. Before we go into the practical aspects of the implementation within DQS Med. And this is something which is to a certain part still ongoing. It is not yet finalized. And one of the reasons is, of course, that we are waiting for the already mentioned plenary sessions of NBMed with the Commission next week, which will also be used to collect some basic information for a complementary MDCG paper, giving further guidance on specific aspects and the impact of the extension. Yeah, and then we have, of course, a bit of a time to Q&A session. So as already mentioned, they will be collected before, and then we somehow try to structure to have the most impact, so that not any duplication of questions will be answered individually, but on a per cluster or per block base. Good. So topic number one, extension. So history of changes. So the first change ranges back into 2020 when with the regulation 2020-561, the first postponement happened by 1 year, while the end of application was maintained, and as such the transitional period has been reduced virtually to about 3 years in total. And from these 3 years in total, next month, 2/3, 2 out of 3, have already been done. So, and the interesting thing is that a couple of product categories which have formerly been classified as class 1, which have never requested the involvement of a notified body at all, initially has to be transitioned before the shifted deadline, which is May 26, 2021. And I show you later that from a mandatory application in 2021, those products will now be in 2028. So the second major is quite recent. It was being issued on March the 20th, and the reasoning and the argumentation behind that is, of course, imminent risk of shortages of medical devices. And all of you know the impact of COVID-19 pandemic has caused a lot of irritation to the whole value chain, to the collaboration on a global base, and as such, first experiences have been made that not all of the medical devices are being certified and being introduced to the market could have been made available with the right lead time and the right quantity. So therefore, that causes this pressure on the Commission to reconsider an extension. And our proposal initially was based on the scenarios we have planned in terms of development of our throughput rate, of the effectiveness of the tech file reviews predominantly, and the learning curve, that postponement of 2 years might be somehow feasible. And you will see later that this is not 2 years, it's depending on the risk class, about 3.5 years in total. So, but any of those transitions comes with a headwind that this extension is linked to certain conditions and provisions to be fulfilled from the manufacturer to be applicable. So the key message of the regulation is pretty straightforward. So extension of MDR transition for legacy devices under the scope based on their risk class are split as follows. So December 2027, high risk class, that is all implantable stuff, so class 3 and class 2B implantable, exempt all these lower risk, which are more to be rather than to be implantable, which are sutures, staples, dental fillings, braces, tooth crown screws, etc., etc., etc. So, and for medium and low risk, which is 2B, 2A, and 1MSR, the shift is 1 year longer, so December 2028. So, and this is 4.5 years plus versus the original deadline. So, and the whole thing works a little bit on the spirit extension of validity of MDD certificates. So the extension of validity is in terms of medical law have to be seen a little bit critical or skeptical. So, for instance, MDD certificates have been limited in their validity to the original date of application, which is May 25, 2024. But since May the 26th, 2021, we are no longer designated as a notified body. Our designation expired with that deadline about 2 years ago. The only way to continue that is based on the contract, the individual B2B contract we have signed from both parties, you as a customers and ourselves as your selected notified body, that we keep on providing surveillance services till the end of their certificate validity, which is of course clamped, so to say, to May 25th, 2024. So, and in this case, the MDD certificate will, so validity is maybe the wrong phrase here. So acceptability might be a better phrase, because a lot of these certificates are not just directly used for inner European purposes, so free trade zone and free trade certificates, etc., but also for third party countries, for example, Arabia or Africa, etc., where the authorities of those countries refer to a valid MDD certificate. And so therefore we need to explain and bridge somehow to those who see now an expired MDD certificate, because it could not be prolonged, it could not be extended, but with a separate attachment saying based on the regulation 2023/607, those are still applicable. So that's what I try to point out. So it's a little bit phrasing battles here, but at the very end, it's not only engineers who are faced with the interpretation of those things, but also the company lawyers who might make their considerations out of that and implement corresponding actions. So, and the third one is, of course, also something pretty beneficial, at least to many customers who have broad product portfolios with relatively long or high level of storage or stock quantities. So they benefit from a removal of the sell-off period, which had originally been 1 year after the date of application. So let's look in detail on the provisions of the regulation. So only MDD legacy devices, and they are pretty well explained within MDCG 2021-25, may benefit from the extended transition period. Legacy devices are devices which have been placed on the market after MDR dates of application, which is the May 26, 2021. That might be either devices which are class 1 under MDD. So class 1 under MDD is something where the manufacturer compiled a self-declaration of conformity, and as such, that they have never been requested to involve a notified body on that. Different story is with their formerly class 1, which have now been up-classified. For instance, the 1R, which is reusable surgical instruments, which comes new to the party. The other two, 1M, so with the measurement function, and 1S, devices in sterile condition, have also been in place before. There are no changes in that. So, and the other part are devices covered by a valid certificate in accordance with, for instance, the Medical Device Directive or the Active Active Implant Medical Device Directive, which has been separate before May 26, 2021. And the issue is that these two directives have been consolidated in the medical device regulation to make use of the similar properties, similar assessment schemes, etc., etc. So therefore, this is also valid for non-MDD but AI-MDD products. So additionally, the manufacturer has to be able to provide a self-declaration upon request. And we are still a little bit debating that, because experience from the past pointed out that self-declaration is not in any case sufficiently substantial or trustable. So therefore, we are looking to specific, more specific requirements, how we back that self-declaration up. And there is a lot of experience in the past when something has been purely relied on self-declaration. It does not work as expected. So on the other hand, there need to be a confirmation that the conditions of the regulation legacy are fulfilled, that the devices are clearly identified. That's for sure. That the scope of the products, the product portfolio has been clearly documented. And of course, stating the end of the transition period, which is May the 26th, 2024. So additional confirmation of the self-declaration might be requested in form of a confirmation letter issued by DQS Med, confirming the fulfillment of conditions. So, and this is our interpretation, as I mentioned before, how we are going to how to beef that up, give more trustability, more confidence that the content of these confirmation is trustable, is reliable, is substantial. So manufacturers who are willing to benefit from this extension have a couple of other tasks. So they should submit at the end, the original date of application, a formal letter of intent for conformity assessment under MDR. So in essence, this letter of intent is in place even today, and this is of course more these RFQ kind of thing, so a request for quotation, for instance, so that we approach you as our customers and ask you for a few company data. One is specifically for structure and number of employees and product specific or process specific information, as well as a product specific in terms of the product range. So This is just nothing more than fulfilling the legal requirements of this extension, but for being on the safe side, there's a little bit more requested, and this is the next topic: mutually signed written agreement. And this is, of course, what we today call conformity assessment procedure contract. And the contract is pretty much more than just covering the content of the conformity assessment activities we are conducting for you as a manufacturer. It is also referring to terms of business, provisions for updates and notification of changes, etc., etc. Also, the provisions in case we cannot issue a certificate due to the fact that certain objective evidence is lacking, and so therefore this written agreement is pretty much more than just a couple of pages form, which is countersigned from both parties. It's basically everything already in place since more than 3 years and has been proven to be effective. And proven to be effective, there's one thing which is extremely important because before we sign this written agreement, we are obliged from the regulation to at least make a completeness check for text file structure and content. And this is an extremely important change versus the previous arrangements. Under the MDD, the text file comes last in the row. First of all, audits have to be performed, and when the auditors have a bit of a capacity left, they work on the text files. So MDR converted the whole thing. MDR starts with a text file review. Reason is straightforward. First of all, the first text file mirrors the issues or potential gaps of a quality management system, and as such gives pretty important information for the upcoming activities, which are the on-site audit in stage 1, preparedness, specifically in terms of document review, and the stage 2, the on-site assessment of the whole entire quality management system. So, and the text file review needs to be completed at least to the level that there is a proposal from the assessor versus or in favor or against the certification. And of course, there are a couple of potential action items, some coppers to be opened, and those will be followed up during the stage 1 and stage 2 audit. And honestly, the rejection rate of the documents being provided firsthand is relatively low. So, and this is on one thing, it's good to know because it makes sure that once your application is accepted, that you might run smoothly to the conformity assessment procedure. And on the other hand, we let's say save the system or protect the system versus text files who are easily identified as insufficient. And every capacity we invest for second or third or it is limited to 3 loops, because once the third rejection from the reviewer is stated, we will close the whole conformity assessment procedure without issuing a certificate and have to report this closure to the European database for blacklisting. So therefore, there's a huge level of interest to make sure that before we even start, everything is well aligned, content is there, and the conformity assessment procedure has a certain level of confidence to be successfully completed. So, and the difference here, letter of intent, you can send out as much letters of intent to various potential notified bodies as you like. I mentioned to you the recent level is 35, send out 35 letters of intent and look what happens. The majority wouldn't even respond if you are a new applicant. That has been communicated from a couple of our competitors. Others will respond and will prognosticate some delays in the conformity assessment procedure due to a specific lack of assessors within that scope being requested for your products. And the third one say, yes, no problem, we can do that. We are sending you a draft contract, fill that out, sign it, send it back. Together with the evidence of the first tag file you would like to have reviewed. And once it is complete, we agree, we countersign the contract, and conformity assessment starts. And the start of the conformity assessment procedure is extremely important because we are restricted by provisions to talk to you individually in terms of giving you specific, tailored, customized hints how to set up your documentation, how you do your decisions, what level of substance you implement, etc. All this is consultancy, and consultancy is strictly prohibited for us as a notified body, because we lose this level of impartiality, which is requested from our designating authority and from the regulation itself. And impartiality, for instance, also means that somebody who has the scope relevant for one of your product categories, he has not worked for competitors in that scope 3 years before the application, just to make sure that the level of independence and impartiality is not sacrificed. So let's look on the content of these two things. Letter of intent, following information has to be provided. That's pretty much simple. Is it a medical device? What is the risk class? What conformity assessment procedure you are pursuing? So usually this is in 98% of the cases, it's an Annex 10 procedure, which consists out of tag file review and quality management system. So you need to also provide a linkage or a reference between the medical device being intended to substitute an MDD legacy device and a proposed timeline. We are on the letter of intent phase, so you can propose whatever you like, but the timeline is a maximum of four months. So that's the difference between May 26 and September 26 of next year. So therefore, not pretty much freedom in that. Usually in issuing the letter of intent, my collective advice, no consultancy, but collective advice is have it already available once you send out the letter of intent, so that you can immediately react once DQS responds, yes, in principle, we are designated, we have capacity, we can do that. So, and as already explained, confirmation of compliance of the quality management system, and this refers to Article 10, and some of those aspects are already valid since May 26, 2021. So these are all which relates, for instance, to UDI labeling, to market surveillance activities and stuff like that. So technical documentation does not have to be submitted with a letter of intent. It's currently in clarification which evidence have to be submitted to demonstrate compliance of the QMS. That's what I pointed out before. That's a topic of next week's discussion. So as soon as we get information on that, we will make a follow-up with any participant of today and update you on the outcome. So a mutually signed written agreement. Before confirmation of the written agreement, the following parts have to be done: complete qualified application review. And honestly, that's very comprehensive kind of review. So it refers to the general requirements for safety and essential performance, and the applicable list out of that is about 80 different documents. So the reviewer for this application review doesn't look into the documents, so because that's the job of our assessors. But it is a qualified regulatory affairs manager who knows pretty well the contents, the structure, and applicability or not. And if any of those 80 is missed, the person will get in touch with you and call for these specific documents or to be provided, or in a second loop. And of course, the clock is ticking there. All of this need to be happen within these 4 months. So dates of submission of individual documentation of all devices to be certified no later than 1 year before the end of their transition period. Yeah, so that is of course something which you have in your hands. Are you just striving, first of all, for a certificate at all, or 2 certificates, because QMS and product are different certificates? So, but at the minimum, you need to have 1 product being certified. Otherwise, you would not get the quality management certificate. So you can decide how to time that. You can do one at all. You can shift that into certain time slices, assuming every quarter or so. And you must keep in mind that at the very end, and the end is far away from today's perspective. It's 2027 or 2028, but soon it is 2027 or 2028. And whatever happens, I can assure you there will be a crowding at the last year before these deadlines. In any case, we can do whatever we like, there will be a crowding. And so therefore, to avoid that as much as possible, a clear strategy have to be provided from you. And so you are not under time pressure. So once you have these principal written agreement with us as a notified bodies, you can decide either in terms of resources to be spent, so workforce, or in terms of capital spend. So that means certification cost, to split that over a certain period of time. And the time is basically from today until end of 2026. So that's 2 and 2/3 of a year. And be assured that anything which comes in before end of 2026, which is far away from now, we will manage to be ready before the deadlines. Anything which comes later is limited due to capacity constraints, and of course, first in, first out. So the queue will be built up within the next 2 and 2.5 years. Okay, so that's for my point, they're extremely important. So sit together with your folks, with your financial guys, with the product management, with the marketing folks, and make yourself a picture how you would like to address that. And we are more flexible than we have ever been before since the publication of the MDR in 2017. So date of the QMS audit confirmed no later than 6 months before the end of the transition period. Look, there is a huge advantage by starting with a tech file. The issue is that structural or documentation issues will be identified as early as possible at all. And that gives you pretty much time to settle yourself for the QMS audit, even in case there are comprehensive modifications of the quality management system necessary. Because usually you have the outcome, which is usually the audit report or the assessment report of a tech file. That's the clinical evaluation assessment report. That's their action plan for certain non-conformities, and that needs to be somehow absorbed. First of all, the regulatory affairs manager gets in touch with the auditor performing the stage 1 audit. So these folks need about a month before they begin to schedule the audit, which is another month. Conducting the audit, stage 1, and compiling the report is another month. Scheduling stage 2 audit is another month. Performing the audit and doing the reporting is another month. So, and you're soon at these 6 months. So anything beyond is somehow critical. And but the good thing is you had these 6 months plus the 3 months for the tech file review, where you can modify any necessary changes of your QMS system. And finally, these 2 parallel activities, tech file review and on-site assessments, will be synchronized and linked together, because both must be positively reviewed from the reviewer, from the certification panel, and finally from the certification decision maker before both certificates will be issued. Good. Proposed timeline should be taken into account. It might be required to deviate from the proposed planning due to availability of resources and, of course, more complex products. So, for instance, if you have combination products, you have class 3 products which need to be applied for consultation with the European authorities. So there's easily 6 to 9 months extra to be considered to be on the safe side. So, and application form will be revised to include options for contract termination in event of non-compliance. That's important. In the past, we were more flexible in that, so we can of course accept also delays from your side. Here we are bound to committed submission dates of technical documentations. And honestly, the extension didn't have the manufacturers in the primary focus. Of course, they did what they can to have at least a certain level of benefit for the manufacturers coming out of these extensions. But the primary objective is straightforward, dedicated to the notified bodies. And I tell you why. The issue is if the applications are not spread as much as possible over a 5 years period, but more focused, let's say, in extreme, everybody applies in the first year. And any high-risk manufacturer has to provide any technical documentation for implantable devices. So any tech file, class 3 or to be implantable, has to be provided and has to be assessed from our end. And that situation comes to an extreme because you have some kind of a 1-year tsunami in year 1 caused by these high-risk products. And the issue is even worse. These tsunami were concurrent every 5 years because the tech file assessment for manufacturers of those kinds of products is to about more than 80+% dedicated to tech file review. So the audits are even in easy cases just 1/3. The majority of the activities are tech file reviews, and depending on the risk class, that might be 60% or close to 100% even. And just the spread of these procedures over a 5 years time frame avoids that we have these periodic capacity issues where the assessors have 1 year where they can work day and night, weekend, etc., and then idle the 4 years to follow because no samples will be taken, like for the lower risk class of 2A and or 2B. So that's also pretty important. Good. For the maintenance of the MDD certificates, we have to perform some surveillance activities. These are not new because that's exactly those who have been followed up since our designation under MDD expires, and they are easily included that are post-market surveillance, market surveillance, vigilance, and registration. So, and if there is a gap between a valid MDD certificate, so that has already been become invalid or expired, then there have to be extra activities to make sure that these gaps will be somehow filled. So, and also this is something we will cover in the revised application form we are recently working upon. So there is a good point in time. So the best ever, because entrance barriers of notified bodies have been reduced, or exit barriers have been reduced from your end to now decide on your future notified body. So the issue is that the system assumes that not as in the past, the majority of the loyal existing clients stick with their previous notified body, but there are a lot of opportunities being used to swap. And this swapping is somehow enabled because, first of all, some of our friends in the notified bodies, I would not like to call them competitors, have a little bit overstressed the acceptance levels of their customers. Overall rates, daily rates or total rates for conformity assessment have been exploded. So in the meantime, there's a factor of 4 between the most affordable. I would not like to call it the cheapest, because cheapest has already negative smell, negative touch, and the most expensive. But what I can tell you is that the concept of MDR within Europe has a certain level of minimum requirements that even the cheapest, the most affordable notified body fulfills the provisions of the MDR for notified bodies. And they are pretty complex. I worked on that with my colleagues for over 2 years to get it finally resolved, and it was a terrible experience. So therefore, don't think that notified bodies who charge quadruple times the rates than the most affordable has significant better performance. There are a few who promise express services. This is also coming under debate under other notified bodies not doing so, because that conflicts somehow with the non-discriminatory handling of clients. And so therefore, there are quite a few customers or prospective customers who talked to me and said, yes, so we didn't have too perfect experience as with one of your competitors. We are honestly considering to move over to you folks. You seem to be more pragmatic, more grounded in terms of service provision and in terms of costing. But anyhow, if that's the case, there is a trilateral agreement between the, so to say, sending or stepping out notified body, the client, and the accepting future notified body, where all these provisions will be put in written in terms of responsibilities and timelines, etc. And the good thing and the reason that these exit barriers are removed is you do not have to revise CE marking and labeling of the devices. And that has been in the past the primary reason to stop any principal considerations to move to another notified body, because the efforts for revising your whole labeling things from adhesive labels via IFUs, etc. That has been too much of an effort, and as such, say, okay, we are not happy with the reasons, but it might be worse in swapping. This is a requirement which has been totally removed. So therefore, we are ready to accept your applications there. So, quick summary. The publication has been, so there's a typo in there. That wasn't 20th May, so the regulation was 20th of March. Sorry, I overlooked that. 26th of May 2024 is the due date for the submission letter, and 4 months later, the mutually signed written agreement. The first two are high risk are due on May the 26th, 2026, custom-made implantable devices class 3. The next are 31st December 2027, which are class 3 and to be implantable. And 1 year later, all the lower risk class, which are 2A, 2B, and 1 R, S, and M. So that's basically the summary of what has been stated. So let's come to status where we are and what we can give you as advice, as guidance in that regard. So there is, of course, not everything yet marbled in stone, but it is clear that we need to put some requirements in the letter of intent, as well as also the confirmation letter. As I mentioned before, give us another week or two. Next week it will be settled. Over next week it will be consolidated and distributed. What's the outcome of the plenary of the European notified bodies is. So what is the content of a trilateral agreement? So that's pretty straightforward, because something else has been in place before for the very, very rare cases. For instance, that I remember one or two that an MDD body didn't manage designation for MDR and decided to step out of MDD before. So we had a couple of these trilateral agreements in before. They will be adapted according to the provisions of the latest Commission publication. And of course, we will revise the application forms and make it pretty clear that the contract is bound for certain requirements in terms of non-compliance. And we meanwhile have reached, after about more than 100 conformity assessment procedures, that we had 2 or 3 cases where we come to the point that after the third review, which was negative, we had to terminate the contract and blacklisted the client on the Udemy database. This is not an easy decision, but finally it's, let's say, self-protection of the system somehow, because it doesn't make sense to invest recurring activities and resources for some products of a client who has not embraced the spirit of the MDR at all. So if things are not directly passing through the first review, that's okay. That's not too uncommon. That happens regularly. But after the second loop, it should definitely be corrected. And there's still one in reserve. The third must be fully hitting the target. Otherwise, we did not have any other chance to terminate the contract, which was announced as a last option offer. So you have further 4 weeks to provide the evidence. Otherwise, we will terminate. And if even that doesn't give sufficient outcome, we will terminate. You as a client can apply whenever you feel confident that another application of the same product will be successful, either at DQS Med again. That's a straightforward thing, because the product is already well known. We know your discrepancies and non-conformities, etc. We have already conducted a successful audit for the quality management system. So it would be worthwhile the effort to apply again in that case. We are not forced by law to accept that application. So when the cooperation was not that trustful, ICE level based, which we always strive for, we might consider to reject the second application. But of course, you can apply with the same product at any other of the other 34 notified bodies. But I tell you, these read carefully these blacklists before they enter into a contract with you, and they might be somehow reluctant in accepting a client who has already proven to be insufficiently prepared for this transition. Okay, yeah. As I already explained, changing the notified body now or never. Okay, good point. We will be conflicted with both sides. So also, I'm absolutely sure, because I've always been involved in customer complaints, that we didn't make any of our customer happy, but at least we try and we strive for that. And project planning, as I mentioned before, is key here. Avoid any backlog. Get in touch with the decision makers internally. So usually this decision is not on one pair of shoulders. That's a team decision, which any aspects will be looked upon. And yeah, there is not always ideal world. Ideal world, for instance, is we have scopes where we have a couple of dozen assessors available, which are running extremely smooth. For instance, software is one of them, and we have other scopes for instance, active implants, where we have just the minimum, which is a tech file reviewer, an auditor, and a reviewer. And those people didn't have just a single scope. They usually have a multiplicity of scopes, and as such, their availability is somehow pretty much restricted. And of course, the risks are application overflow at the end of the transition period, as already explained, extra unforeseeable loops, duration of consultation procedure, so where others like the European Medicine Agency or the panels have to be involved for class 3 products, and as such, contingency should be considered. Don't plan the ideal world. Plan ideal world plus 6 months, and you are usually on the safe side. And change notifications under MDD are still possible, as long as they are not non-significant. We can do that. We cannot change the certificates on that. So certificates are basically frozen since May 26, 2021, but we issue an attachment sheet covering these kind of changes still. So, and refer on MDCG 2020-3 on significant changes, and also important, even if you are already through the conformity assessment procedure, you have already a product plus a QMS certificate. So a change notification is no guarantee for VIP services. So everything will be handled non-discriminatory on a first in, first out kind of operation. So that's something our designating authority will have a very decent look upon. So extension transition periods already have stated. So you can, of course, and this is also important, run parallel in two worlds. You can keep your MDD certificates as long as you like, in brackets, before the end of the corresponding validity dates, as explained before, but you are deciding when those will be terminated. Of course, there are extra costs because once we come for surveillance activities, we will not just have a look on the MDR part of your quality management system, but also spend a bit of a time on your MDD aspects. But this is, of course, some insurance policy to make sure that first you got the new product certified under MDR, and then after some internal transition period, you decide, okay, now it's time to cancel that. But in principle, before expiration of the revised date of application deadlines, you can run both parallel. So that's an important thing, maybe not clear to everybody before. So MDD certificates that have expired before this, oh, here it's correct, 20th March. So that is the issuance of the new addendum shall only be considered either before the date of certificate. DGS may have a written agreement for the conformity assessment, of the device under MDD or of a device intended to substitute that MDD device. So in essence, that means there is already an agreed and countersigned contract for conformity assessment under MDR in place. That's one option. So unfortunately, the 20th of March is gone, so you can easily answer if you fall under category A or not. Category B is national competent authority has granted a derogation, and this is more a principal consideration. Yes, that's an option, but not really, because this derogation is first limited to a single member state in the European community. So in case you will cover the whole entire European community, you need to apply for 30 different countries derogation requests, and this is done per product. So if you look on that on your product range, and to make it simple, you just have 10 products which you ship into 20 European member states. Just the biggies are out of them. Those with a major volume, and you have 10 times 20, 200 derogation requests to be sent to the national competent authority. So that's ridiculous. So that's not really an option, to be frank. If it is just one thing in Germany, it might happen, but I'm definitely sure that the German competent authority will reject that because he must make clear that there are very good reasons that he would not be in the position to carry out the applicable conformity assessment procedure. So therefore, just a principal option. So as I mentioned before, new issuance of changes to MDD certificates, they cannot be altered somehow, but they can be recognized as valid beyond the indicated dates of validity. So that's what I and what I already explained. Validity is not the right phrase, but in essence, it's somehow stated that they will be applied and recognized beyond that. And supplementary confirmation letters, that's daily business for us for some non-significant changes. For instance, a company moved to another location. Processes are pretty much the same. The products are exactly the same. The quality management system is the same. So therefore, we all, put an extra complementary confirmation letter in saying old address valid until, new address valid since, and that's it. Pretty straight. So classification rules for determining the transition period. Look, there are a couple of products which have been up-classified in the MDR versus old MDD classifications. So in that case, the risk class of the product indicated on an MDD certificate might differ from the risk class that determines the end of the transition period. So in that case, there is an intermediate risk classification needed during the transition period. And this has been clearly stated in the MDCG 2021-25. So these are those who will be applied to make sure that they fall either under the 2027 or 2028 deadlines. So let's come to the summary and conclusion. So we are very well in time. Never a better point in time to consider swapping to another notified body. And if you swap, please swap to us. Applying for MDR before the end of the year to avoid overflow. And that's clearly stated. At this point in time, our existing customers have already applied for MDR in the level of 60+%. So there is still a rest or a gap of 1/3 out of them. And I'm pretty sure that many of those are trying to push that to the very, very limit. And pretty important, make use of existing MDD in parallel to the already granted MDR certificate if it makes sense to you. And if it doesn't make sense, terminate as soon as possible. So maybe immediately right after the receipt of the new MDR certificates, because you must somehow balance extra costs, extra efforts, extra resources versus benefits in keeping these two things in parallel. So I think that's all from my side. First of all, are there any questions?
Yeah. So thank you, Mr. Michael, for taking out your time amidst your busy schedule and giving us, more detailed information on the subject. So we do have few questions. So I would be reading out the question one by one. So the first question, so the first question that we have received is, in the letter of intent template, will it be provided by the notified bodies, or the manufacturer can draft it in their format?
No. So we are just waiting till next week. If there's an adjusted, consolidated outcome from the notified body plenary, if that's not going to come next or over next week, we will do an individual one as a DQS Med and make it available via the download center of our webpage.
So yeah, the next question. One second. The client has MDD CE certification with a notified body for a product which is expiring in May 2023. And the client has now signed up for MDR with DQS. So post May 2023, can the client export the product to Europe? Are there any documentation required for this? Hello?
One, two. So audio has been disconnected for a couple of seconds. So I got the question. So
okay.
first of all, having already applied for MDR resolves all the issues, because the prerequisite has been met to have a mutually agreed contract by end of September 2024. So, and due to the fact that the expiry of the certificates is somehow cancelled, you can keep on shipping the products till the end of the date of application period, which is depending on the risk class, either December 31st, 2027 or 2028.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So the next question, what about the products or packaging material which already has a CE marking number, especially after transition from one NB to another?
That was made clear in the file. Everything which is in terms of packaging and labeling and IFU, etc., will be still valid, even if it was transferred to another notified body.
Okay, thank you. we will go for one more question. How the transfer of the surveillance activities from different NB is planned by DQS before 26 September 2024?
So it's not finally concluded, but I'm pretty sure that we stick to the concept we have already in place since May 2021. So our surveillance activities are somehow seen as a total one. So the more of the products which have already been moved into MDR and have already been sampled and tech file assessed, etc., we would usually not duplicate the efforts for MDD sample picking as such. But if this level is low, we will also continue with sample picking on 2A and 2B products as in the past. So assume that the certification cycle of the MDD certificate is not 5 years, but it is 8 years instead. And it's pretty much the continuation of activities under MDD, which have been performed since the denotification in May 2021. Surveillance audits once a year, unannounced audits at least one every 3 years, and tech file reviews based on a sample plan in case this has not been fully completed due to a very huge number of products within the same code, the same product category.
Okay, thank you. So we have time for one more question. So will DQS issue any assurance certificate to the manufacturers who has filed an application with us? If yes, then what will be the duration of it?
So look, we were approached from a variety of customers who are still struggling to come to that level of documentation provided to give us the position to accept the conformity assessment procedure. Once we have signed the contract from our side, we are always prepared to send up a confirmation letter which says, yes, the contract has been formally accepted. And in terms of timing, we assume a lead time of whatever, months, quarters, years, etc. So this is a common practice, but without having the MDR conformity assessment application accepted, we have no chance to give any formal statement in that regard.
Okay, so one last question. Is UDAMED registration considered as transition requirement for a manufacturer?
Can you please repeat that? Sorry.
Is UDAMED registration considered as transition requirement?
Good question. So UDAMED is pretty much related to MDR requirements. So, and first of all, it is in the responsibility of the manufacturer to register the facility, to register the products, and get these UDI codes out of that. With that UDI codes, we, at the end of the certification process, after having the certificates granted, enter with these numbers our certificate number. So that is, of course, facility registration plus product identifier plus certificate identifier. This triple is sufficient to have a clear linkage to the individual client and their specific product. So UDAMED is primarily dedicated to MDR requirements, and it works meanwhile sufficiently well. Not every issue is yet resolved, but there is no drawback in providing these case of registration activities. And it is one of the requirements in accepting an application that you have your actor registration number as a manufacturer already available. Otherwise, they will be rejected.
Okay, so thank you so much. We have few more questions, but then due to time constraint, we are not able to take all of it. So we would reply you through email.
Yes,
and
of course.
Yes, so we will take up these questions and then we will reply. You will get your reply. Yes, so I thank you all for attending this webinar, and I hope it was a useful one for you. And I thank